So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and for something a little bit different again, because this is something that was sent to me by Kuro, and it's from the RP campaign that's going on the official Discord at the moment. The exact name of it actually escapes me at the moment, and I just read it just before I started doing this replay as well, so my mind's drawing a blank on that. But we're going to see two Linden armies against two Harad armies. Now, I think one of the things in the campaign was that they got to choose their starting locations, otherwise, naturally, if we were going by the canon geography of Middle-earth, it would be very unlikely in an RP campaign that Linden and Harad would ever meet, and if they did, they would be the last two factions left on the map, because I think, as it stands, lore-wise, they are the furthest two factions away from one another. That might change if the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains are added, but as is, obviously they are in different places on the map. I'm not exactly sure where, but that doesn't really matter so far. This is a fairly long battle for a 2v2 as well, at 25,000 frames, and you can tell from the not exactly forthright manner in which both armies have deployed that this is going to be very much a touchy-feely kind of map, where they're going to sort of try and trade with each other as efficiently as possible, because of course in an RP you need to think about conservation of units as well. So this actually has a sort of, a standard Total War campaign feel, where you try to conserve your units as best you can. We'll see. I think Harad are probably the ones that are on the attack, based on the fact that Linden have deployed right at the back of the map, and Harad have deployed a little bit further forwards. Obviously both factions a little bit less focused around armour, a little bit more focused around being a little bit more in terms of damage dealers. But we'll go through the army compositions, and I'll go through them in a little bit more detail, because they may very well turn out to be very important as we go along. So we've got Sin of the Dark Cloud as one of the Linden armies, and he's of course got some cavalry in the tree line over here ready to hide, ready to ambush. I mean, this is a fairly obvious gambit. I'd be surprised if Harad were to fall for this. But Linden cavalry in general is very, very good, very versatile with how they are hybrid units in nature. Mithlon Lancers, for example, have got their javelins to deal with other cavalry potentially and skirmish them down. And then they are, of course, lance cavalry as well, so they've got a nice armour-piercing charge when they pull out their lances. And over here we've got another unit of the same thing, so they could come in and sweep in with their javelins to do a lot of damage. Another unit that doesn't need the trees to hide is going to be the Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Very, very strong range unit. One of the better range units, simply because they are slightly stronger in melee than your average ranger, because they have dual swords, which means they are, of course, a little bit more skillful in melee and a little bit more difficult to take down. You still don't exactly want to use them for the sort of things that heavy-duty line infantry will be used for, but even so, they will hold their own a little bit better. We've got some 4 Linden archers over here as well, with some stakes deployed in front of them, obviously a little bit cheaper than the other archers Linden have available, but of course entry-level Elven archers are still going to be more than a match for any other faction's entry-level archers. Mithlon Marines, which are of course javelin units, which hybridize as line infantry as well. Very, very effective all-around unit as well. The 4 Linden Marines are a little bit more common, because they can also be used pretty effectively as anti-cavalry tools, but in this situation, having a little bit more infantry might be more than Harad can handle, depending on their composition. Harlinden Infantry and 4 Linden Pikemen is a very, very common front line to see as Linden, because the Harlinden Infantry will be able to outclass most other non-Elven line infantry units in terms of skill, and having the pikes to back them up means it's going to be a little bit more difficult to fight them from the front. It's a very bright map, this one, and you can tell when they turn into sprites much more easily on brighter maps. This is with the brightness down at 25% as well. I suppose Reshade does add a little bit more brightness, which is unfortunate, but this will work. Noldering Guard, the only heavily armoured Linden unit really, and they also inspire. Very, very good, very effective. Only a single unit of them, I believe. We'll see how well they can hold up to a horde of Haradrim in the distance there. Over here we've got a couple of units of 4 Linden Marines. As I said, they hybridize as spear units, which makes them very good anti-cavalry tools. And then at the back we've got some Noldering Horse Lords, which is going to be Linden's general unit, obviously as knights. They'll be able to outclass any of Harad's mounted units outside of their speciality units, stuff like the War Beasts, which are a little bit of a wild card, and obviously the Mumakil, which potentially can be real game changers. And then over here we can see that his ally is going to be Engsfitz, and his army is going to probably move to meet up with Sins as quickly as possible. And we can see that he hasn't exactly set out his stall in a cohesive manner. He's just going to run over, and they're going to try and essentially corner camp by the looks of things. Interesting. Elven corner camping. We'll see how well this goes. Some 4 Linden archers at the front as well. We've got some Harlinden Guard as well, which of course do double as spears in addition to being archers. Linden in general have got a lot of tools that can be used against enemy cavalry, which makes them particularly hard to play against in some cases. Another unit of Noldering Horse Lords as well, so 2 knights, which Harad don't have access to knights, so it'll be interesting to see how they deal with this. Mithlon nobles, so it'd be good to see some chariots with their javelins, of course. Again, they can be very hit or miss, the chariots, but more often than not they are now more usable than they used to be, so hopefully we'll see the chariots get some good work done. Some more Harlinden Guard, and then we've got his infantry laid out in columns, so he's got some 4 Linden Marines, several units of Harlinden infantry making up the backbone of his army, as well as 2 units of Mithlon pikemen, so some heavy duty pikes there, as well as some 4 Linden pikes. Then he's got some Mithlon Marines and another unit of 4 Linden Marines, so all in all, Linden can be a very difficult faction to overcome. Harad might struggle with them more than most as well. It'll be interesting to see how Harad do, especially seeing as they look to be the ones that have to attack. So we've got Heracles over here, who is playing as Harad, the first Harad army. Haradrim Spearmen at the front, as well as some Haradrim Archers. And Southron Archers, of course, the one thing that Harad will have over Linden is more of an emphasis on disposable units, so we'll see. I think probably in terms of a skirmish fight, if Harad have gone this direction, Harad should be able to skirmish down Linden, but then there is the cavalry to consider as well. So a lot of these basic Haradrim units. We've also got some Demons of the Desert over here. 2 units of them, I believe, which potentially could be extremely devastating, but they need to steer well clear of the Elven Archer lines. They definitely need to stay back until the late game if they are to be fully effective. Got some Muhad Beast Hunters as well, some standard javelins. And then back here we've got some cavalry, so we've got some Haradrim Raiders. You don't see these guys an awful lot in sort of standard battles. With the RP, of course, these units could be cheap to recruit. The Haradrim Raiders, of course, just sort of entry-level horse skirmishers. Be interesting to see how they work out. Against Linden, they could do pretty well for themselves in the right sort of situation. Although with the corner camping that is seemingly going to be inevitable, the horse archers might struggle to skirmish as effectively as they otherwise would. A couple of units of Serpent Guard, as will the Lance Cavalry. If Linden have set their stall out correctly, the Lance Cavalry will have few opportunities to lay down their full effectiveness, as well as the Black Serpents. Obviously, Harad's Lancers are very quick. The Black Serpents certainly tend to zip around the battlefield very, very quickly. Another unit of Beast Hunters over here, and then I believe this will be getting into the second army. We have some Mumakil over here, and it is WK. Of course, he would be playing as Harad in the RP. So he's got some Mumakil. The Mumakil might be very key here. If they can smash through Linden's carefully organised defence, that could cause the chaos that Harad need. We've got some Champions of Nafrat. The AP won't serve them too well, but their multiple HP nature and their high attack should. And obviously the Trollmen as well. Very similar story here. The real backbone of the Harad infantry here is going to be very important for them to get a lot of kills, because few of Harad's infantry units will be able to trade efficiently with the Harlinden infantry and Linden pikes if it comes down to a grindy infantry fight. We've got some Demons of the Desert over here as well. Lots of cavalry. So we've got some more Serpent Guard. And we've got some more Haradrim Raiders. There's a lot of Lancers. There might be enough Lancers even to subdue a lot of the Linden Cavalry, but the Linden Knights will be difficult to reconcile with. And then, of course, a lot of Archers as well. With all of these Archers, I think Harad, if it turns into a grindy Archer fight, they might be able to force Linden out of their little corner. And then we've got some Haradrim Spearmen, just some disposable units at the front. There may very well be hidden units as well. Hashari, of course, mounted and dismounted. Erkenhide and Harad have got other units also. But other than that, we may as well begin, although I will make a little cut because both armies are fairly far away from each other, and there will certainly be a period of very careful manoeuvring. So as soon as the archer companies engage one another, we will rejoin the fight. Well, there's little in the way of wasted time here, because WK is going to be sending forward his Haradrim Raiders en masse to try and pepper down the Linden forces as they try and group up with one another. Now, interestingly enough, these chariots are coming down here. It looks like they're running over their own man, but they will get back up. Now, interestingly enough, this is kind of an interesting move. I mean, the chariots, when they utilise their... And they are actually killing quite a lot of these Haradrim Raiders, but they do have javelins, so they will be able to utilise them pretty effectively. But these do need to be careful, because they're pretty expensive. They're not exactly the tool you want to throw away to deal with just lowly Haradrim Raiders. The Noldorin Horse Lords, of course, will slaughter basic horse archers in melee. But this is the sort of move which could be viewed as slightly reckless. Those Haradrim Raiders are already shaken. But so far this recklessness has paid off, because they have managed to stave off the Haradrim Raiders. And indeed now the Linden mounted units will return to their own lines. That could have been dangerous, however. If the Serpent Guard were in the correct position, they could have charged into, and then the armor, not so much the armor piercing, but the heavy charge that they could inflict on the Noldorin Horse Lords could have been pretty significant. And if they could have dealt with one of those Noldorin Horse Lords early, that would have made the cavalry advantage squarely in Harad's favour, which they definitely need. In terms of pure infantry, Linden have got a big advantage here. All of the Harlinden infantry and all of the pikes are going to be able to make quick work of most of the Harad infantry we've seen on display, but it is mostly archers and mounted units, so Harad could be pretty awkward for Linden to deal with in this situation. And I do find myself rooting for Harad. It doesn't matter in what situation you do it, such reckless corner camping can never be endorsed by me. We'll see. If this ambush comes off with these two Mithlon Lancers, then I'll be a little bit more happy about it, but, you know, Elves corner camping. The RP is certainly not a place where you make friends with your tactics. But we'll see here. I mean, Harad definitely have the tools to make this corner camping a little bit more awkward for Linden. We'll see how they approach this. I mean, we've got several units of Harad and Spearmen. These are definitely just throwaway units. You can't really charge into them with cavalry and expect to get too much efficiency off of them, as long as Harad have got their own cavalry here to screen as well. If Linden send their Noldorin Horse Lords all alone, they could find themselves losing them. The rest of the army moving up, of course. The Muma kill will probably be the deciding factor here. If they are utilised effectively, it could be nasty for Linden. I don't believe any of Linden's Javelin units have got the Throne trait, which is the thing which makes them essentially hard counters to Mumakil, stuff like the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, and I think the Demons of the Desert would have that as well, but not that a mirror match would ever actually happen, but the Throne trait is what makes elephant type units die basically instantly when they get hit by it, and that is not the case for all Javelins anymore. Basic Javelins will no longer massacre Mumakil quite as quickly. They're still effective, but not quite the insta-kill they used to be. Haradrim Raiders moving forward, this time of Heracles. Just going to be probing the lines. It will be interesting actually to see if they are able to bait these Mithlon Lancers out of the trees, and I would assume here that the Harad players are well aware that there are almost certainly units hidden within these trees. But I don't think they're going to be able to unveil these Mithlon Lancers without getting too close. And naturally, in a melee fight, the Haradrim Raiders will be outclassed by every other mounted unit on the field. Entry-level horse skirmishers are not exactly the last word in quality in terms of melee. And Sin is holding his ground, wisely so, not falling for the bait here. All of these Haradrim Raiders maybe getting a little close. The Serpent Guard as well. Looks like they are going to... well, they have now spotted the Mithlon Lancers, I would assume. And now the Mithlon Lancers are going to have to be... going to be forced to come out of the tree line, and now a really nasty crossfire coming in on those elves there, and they have layered their skirmishers as well, so even if they do catch up with one of them, there are several other units of horse archers ready. The Serpent Guard are also going to meet them in melee, and the Mithlon Lancers are Lancers in melee as well, so it's not like they're spear cavalry. The Serpent Guard will do fairly well for themselves, and the Mithlon Lancers will be falling back here. The Noldorin Horse Lords have come forward from Enkspitz as well. Now this is certainly a unit which none of these Harad units can really match in melee, but several of the Noldorin Horse Lords at this point have fallen away. They do not have a shield, and they do not have as higher armour values as other knights, so eventually skirmish fire will take its toll, and it looks like it has been doing so. And now the Mithlon Lancers are being forced to retreat as well, so this is good cavalry probing here by Harad. Although that was a bit unfortunate there, those horse archers going right into the jaws of the Mithlon Lancers. More Haradrim Raiders coming in, trying to overwhelm the Mithlon Lancers, and the lack of a anti-cavalry bonus will be a big factor here. Playing tag with their cavalry here, and this is ultimately a fight that Harad should win. They definitely have more cav with which to trade than Linden do. But by the same token, they do need to conserve some of their cavalry, because if they lose too much of it in the early game, they will not have enough of it to make an impact on Linden's far superior infantry. And these Mithlon Lancers, so they are going to be able to deal with one of these units of Mithlon Lancers, which is a pretty big loss here, because they weren't really able to utilise their javelins at all. And that's some high quality ammunition that has essentially gone down the drain. And they haven't really been able to inflict too many losses on the Harad cavalry, and what losses they have taken have just been on their raiders, which Harad will be more than willing to trade them for as long as they may live on this field. There's still another unit of Mithlon Lancers hidden within these trees, however. It'll be interesting to see if Harad can bait those out as well. Those Mithlon Lancers routing, running for the hills. I think Enkspitz was able to salvage his Noldorin Horse Lords. Sin's Noldorin Horse Lords are still very much online. Mithlon nobles are still alive. You can see there that Heracles' army is swinging out wide, so he can try and go down the line, which is definitely the way to go. You don't really want to charge right up the face of this hill that Linden have perched themselves on. Now you can see that the Harad cavalry is still just having a look around in the trees, trying to make sure that they found all that is there to be found. Of course they haven't, we know this, thanks to these Mithlon Lancers. I'd be interested to see if Harad have brought any Hashari. Hashari are perhaps the one Harad unit that have the skill necessary to go toe-to-toe with some of the better Elven units. Of course the range variants are rangers as well. And that body piercing could be especially effective against Linden, especially with a densely packed Linden formation like this. Would be just the ticket for dealing with these pike blocks. But even so, Linden is such a dangerous faction to fight against. With all of their javelins, if you get caught up in their web for too long, those javelins can really take their toll. Linden, in my opinion, are definitely the easiest of the Elven factions to play. Imladris are also fairly easy in how you are supposed to approach things. I think particularly with that Eldar Enway only army we saw a few battles ago, that it goes to show that an elite Imladris army can certainly be a real force of nature. Lothlorien and Mirkwood, you have to be a little bit more careful with how you pick your armies. You can definitely pick a wrong army more easily with Lothlorien and Mirkwood, to my mind, than you can with Imladris and Linden. Linden's armies in many cases practically pick themselves. Although this is the RP, of course, so you have to recruit your units. Sins, Nolder and all sorts. Engsfitz has lost 9 of his knights, which could be significant considering all the cavalry that Harad has to play with. But at this point in time, they have managed to sort of clear the trees, even if they may not be so sure of that fact themselves. You can see them still sort of probing in and out. But it is still going to be a very difficult defensive position for them to break down. They have managed to sort of post themselves up here in the corner. And they are being forced ever further backwards, however. And they are in a bit of danger here of making themselves too bunched up. You can see here that there is another cavalry unit of Haradrim Raiders coming over here. The Harlinden Guard, however, have sort of situated themselves on the front. So whether it is a melee cavalry unit or a ranged cavalry unit, the Harlinden Guard are a pretty good unit to have out in front with their spears and their bows, particularly against a more lightly armoured faction like Harad. Might be a more different story if you're facing one of the more heavily armoured good kingdoms of man. It's very much a battle of manoeuvring here so far, as it is wont to be. But I would be interested to see when they decide to engage one another, because I don't really think it matters too much how Harad approaches, as long as they don't go up this really steep section of hill here. If they go around from both sides, it's really going to come down to whether or not they can utilise their Mumakil at the right time, and whether or not they can utilise their cavalry to its full effect or not. If they can get in and around and start doing some real damage here in the guts of Linden's army with their lancers, they should be fairly well situated. But the prevalence of Linden's javelins is going to make that very difficult ultimately. If I were a betting man, I would probably put my money on Linden, especially seeing as it seems, based on how the battle is going so far, Linden are the defenders in the situation the RP has presented itself with. And that certainly affords them certain camping privileges for Linden archers moving forward. So presumably we're going to see the start of a skirmish fight in earnest here, which is presumably what is going to decide this fight, because I can't imagine Harad's infantry is going to be up for too much of an elongated line battle. Haradrim spearmen. Harad definitely need to leverage their archers, and there are Haradrim archers moving forward. It's going to be tricky. It'll be interesting to see again. I should probably have a look at the Harad forces to see if there are in fact Hashari. There are Trollmen, there are champions of Nafarat. Harad have got their own javelins, but the Demons of the Desert are not the sort of thing you want to expose to the Elven archers, so they are definitely the sort of thing you want to save for later. They're not half bad in melee either. Ooh, hello. Here we can see the Haradrim Raiders, but now we can see an aggressive move here by Engsfitz. He's going to be charging his chariots forward, and they will do hefty damage to basic Haradrim archers, which were sent forward a little bit short of support. Now the Serpent Guard are moving forward. The Mythlon nobles are going to take shots in the back as they try and retreat, however, and as soon as... Chariots do have heightened levels of hit points. I think they have 4 hit points, both the Linden and the Runic chariots. But as soon as those hit points are gone, they can find themselves pretty vulnerable to attack. Anti-cavalry units will make very quick work of them, even with their hit points if they get stuck. But they should be able to survive against lower tier archer fire for a little while yet. There are those Muhard Beast Hunters in close attendance now as well, so that probably won't work again. But still, he managed to deal some pretty nice chip damage there to the Haradrim archers, and that's the sort of thing which could make the Haradrim skirmishers less efficient to the point that Linden might be able to dictate terms here. Haradrim raiders coming forward as well, so they're really going to be piling the pressure on in terms of their ranged contingent here, Harad. And Linden have 2 units of Harlinden Guard and a unit of 4 Linden archers over on this flank. And this is still technically an uphill battle for Harad. But here come the Mythlon nobles again, and Heracles needs to be careful here. He's been essentially burnt 3 times at this point. If the Mythlon nobles connect, this will be the 3rd time these chariots have been able to do some nice damage to Harad. None of it has been terminal yet, but once again they are charging in here. And they really need to bring these chariots down. It will certainly give Linden less of an offensive option. But so far Engsfitz has made very good use of his chariots, and now this unit of Haradrim raiders might rout here. They're wavering and they don't have too much in terms of their unit left. They really need to get some anti-cavalry units. I think one of the issues here is the only anti-cavalry foot unit they have really are several units of Haradrim spearmen. And their lack of infantry might be telling a bit here, because they really can only cover their archers with their own cavalry, and this is giving the Linden chariots a little bit more of a license to be a little bit more reckless. WK's Haradrim spearmen are moving forward. Here come the Haradrim raiders, although once again this is going to end exceedingly poorly for them, I think, although they might be trying to bait the Mythlon nobles out, which it looks as though they're going to succeed in doing, but once again the Mythlon nobles are not going to follow them all the way. Engsfitz isn't daft, he's not going to follow them right into the clutches of those beast hunters. They're trying to go for the Serpent Guard here, which are going to be somewhat successful. Several of the Haradrim lancers dying. So far I have to say it seems like Harad are slowly being bled from the wrists here. And they need to change something about their approach, otherwise this battle's only going to go in one direction, I think. They need to put more concerted pressure onto the Linden lines. Now this is a very risky move. These Muhard Beast Hunters are now out in front. And the way Engsfitz has been using his chariot so far, if they turn around and charge into those densely packed javelins, that could be game over for them very, very quickly. Harad do have a lot of units that they can afford to throw away, to be fair. But I don't know. I'm not sure if they've got the manpower to sustain these kind of losses. I mean, all Linden really need to do is sit here and keep their shape, and if things keep going in the same direction, then they should win. Now we can see the chariots once again moving forward, although they aren't too eager to go into those Muhard Beast Hunters, and now they're a Serpent Guard moving forward. We could see a charge, nope. Again, this is the nature of quite a lot of the tournament games I've seen as well, and it would appear the RP games as well. People are a lot more cautious, a lot less willing to be aggressive, which, to be fair, with the armies they have, that's somewhat understandable. Harad especially don't really have the infantry that they can just throw to the walls. They need to be a little bit more careful about it. They're running over their own men here. Once again, the Haradrim raiders, these Linden chariots have got some nice speed on them, and the horse archers are not really able to get up to the kind of speed that's necessary, and of course then they're able to escape very easily, because chariots have got huge mass, of course, which means they can pull through the lines. And those are Hashari Stalkers. That's definitely a unit which Harad need to make sure stay alive. Those body-piercing projectiles are again the sort of thing which could turn the match around, but one of the chariots has now fallen, and this is the moment where, yeah, several of the chariots are now fallen, so they lingered a little bit too long in melee. When the chariots stop moving, that's always a danger, and they have lost some of their unit models at this point. Not all of them though, so they still have that offensive option. What is going on down here? Still just basic spears. It's entirely possible as well that Linden had more money to play with, considering the way that RP campaigns tend to work, and Harad had to make do with what they have. Considering the prevalence of these lower tier units, just makes me want to root for Harad more though. Again, these pike lines are going to be fairly brutal. It is the sort of thing that the Mumakil are fairly hard counter to, though, in all fairness. Smashing through those lines, but there is a time and a place for it, and they definitely need to be patient. The danger, of course, is that the Mumakil end up being irrelevant to the fight, because Lyndon could basically wrap up the fight before then. Oh, and there's some routing Haradrim raiders, some of them routing through the Lyndon lines and losing their lives for it. Shooting circle, which is not something you see all that often. I've never found shooting circle to be all that useful, to be honest with you. The horse archers tend to die just as quickly as they would if they were standing still, but it looks cool nonetheless. Haradrim archers, and we see the Serpent Guard. Harad are probing, but they don't really have any gaps here, and this is the issue that I can see. They keep trying to move forward, but it's very easy for Lyndon to just block their advance wherever they need to. And when it comes to anti-cavalry tools, Lyndon just have too many for this sort of approach to really work most of the time. And WK does have some elite infantry units, but not nearly enough that you could just send them charging up the hill. You can see now moving forward we've got Heracles sending forward some Haradrim spears. It's entirely possible, of course, that Harad are trying to bait Lyndon into using their missile units, but again, I haven't seen Heracles play before, but all the other three players I've seen play before, and it's going to be harder than that to bait them into wasting all of their ammunition, especially seeing as they've got javelins here as well on the front line. But we will be moving towards the final 10,000 frames of this fight fairly soon, and most of both armies are still intact, the heart and soul of both armies anyway. So I would assume at some point something has to give, and there will be some sort of mass committal of troops one way or the other. Whether that comes from Lyndon deciding to counter-attack down the hill, or Harad deciding to throw caution to the wind and trying to engage, we shall see. 4 Lyndon pikemen are moving forward, possibly into the range of the archers, which is a bold move. The Harland infantry will be placed in front of them, and their shield value will shield the pikes. There hasn't really been any decisive moves made yet. The most significant thing that's been happening has been sort of chariot harassal and the rooting out of that ambush in the woods, but other than that, not much has happened as yet. Pikes are moving forward, so it looks as though Lyndon are going to set up a front line, and naturally Haradrim spearmen are going to be absolutely no match at all for Harlinden infantry. And WK's trying to retreat his spears, but he'd be lucky if they don't rout in this situation. They're already wavering. Looks like they are technically going to escape. I can't imagine they're going to last all that much longer, and I think this is going to be the cue for some sort of big committal of forces here from both teams. Haradrim spearmen are going to try and tie down some of these infantry units for as long as possible, but this is the moment where Harad need to move quickly, because if they don't, these spearmen are going to collapse, and then there's going to be no infantry cover for their ranged units, which would essentially allow Lyndon to just continue an assault forwards. Serpent Guard, you can see there, Sin is sending his cavalry out wide, Noldorin Horse Lords and Mithlon Lancers. A charge there from the Serpent Guard, but they're already shaken, at least they were momentarily. The spearmen are routing, and the Harlinden infantry have been bloodied, but certainly not killed. And there you can see those Serpent Guard were going to go in for a charge, but they chickened out at the last moment, and Harad need to do something here. I don't know what, but they need to do something quickly, otherwise this battle's going to get away from them very, 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 very quickly. All Lyndon really needs to do, to my mind, is keep their shape. And as long as they continue to bleed out all of this Haradrim manpower, they'll be able to just overwhelm the Mumakil. Meanwhile, you see that there are still Serpent Guard alive. These Lancers could be a big part of this fight, and here we're going to see a big frontal charge here, right into the Harlinden infantry, and they did not have pikes just in behind them either. And now we can see Champions of Nafrat as well, and here come the Mumakil. The Mumakil need to not linger too long within range of javelins. You can see that the initial engagements have obviously gone terribly for the Haradrim spearmen. The Lyndon infantry has just stomped them into the dirt. But this is where Lyndon could start to feel the pressure from some of Harad's key units. Those Mithlon nobles are still taking arrow fire. We can now see the Champions of Nafrat, which one of the very few units on the field for Harad in melee which can deal efficiently with elven infantry. They are taking javelin fire by the looks of things, but Champions of Nafrat, of course, forces of nature in melee, more so against armoured units than anything else, but The Black Serpent bodyguards now being harried by the Harlinden nobles. Harlinden, Mithlond nobles. Here are the Trollmen, which are presumably just going to pass right through these Harlinden guard and then get into the secondary line. Although now, javelins have been set up, which presumably for the express purpose of trying to stave off those Trollmen. Here come the Noldorin guard. Might be a good idea actually to slow things down. Usually I'm having to slow things down at the beginning of fights, rather than towards the closing stages. Noldorin guard are now chasing off what remains of these units. Oh, this unit of Trollmen has been easily thrown off. This was a much harsher gradient they had to go up, and now Linden are starting to counter-attack, and they have very little in the way of infantry that can actually defend their skirmishers. The Mumakil, it's now or never really for the Mumakil. You can see that Linden are now sweeping down from their hill that they've been on, and without some form of reversal in fortunes, I don't think Harad are going to be able to stop them. Even with the lancers they have, I think Linden have just got too much in the way of anti-cavalry tools. What have we got going on over here? We've still got a lot of skirmishers over on this side of things. And you would expect, I mean, over here there are now substantial gaps opening up, but I don't think Heracles has the cavalry anymore to actually exploit that. His Black Serpents took a little bit of a beating from the Linden chariots, which, speaking of which, I can't actually see them anymore, so it's entirely possible they were finally brought down by Harad. But now is the time for the Serpent Guard to just sort of wrap around here. I mean, the abundance of Linden javelins can make it very difficult to play like that, but at this point I don't think Harad have too much of a choice. The Haraj marchers are being engaged in melee, which obviously if the melee variant of this militia unit can't deal with elven infantry, then the archer variant certainly won't in melee either. And these Mumakil are on the retreat. They're going backwards, which oh, here are the chariots as well. The Mumakil are moving away from the fight, which is the last thing Harad need at the moment. They need something to give, and I don't think it's going to be forthcoming. Meanwhile, now we can see the Black Serpents are on a sort of counter push. Those Mumakil over there are starting to charge into units now, units of javelins no less. Those Black Serpents need to get in and around units somehow and do some form of damage, because Harad's infantry is starting to fall apart in places. They still have the Trollmen and the Champions over here, and to be fair, where Heracles' army is, Linden's resistance is starting to look a little bit more thin on the ground. If we have a look at the percentage of kills, Linden are ahead, if only by 3%, but it's the quality of units they have left, and I worry for Harad in melee. They're going to need to kite a lot in order to try and make this up, and now Nolder and Horse Lords are charging into what remains of their archers. And I think this is the area where Linden is starting to win the fight. They're starting to wrap around, and then I think as long as this line up here of Linden holds Harad reasonably at bay, I think Linden should be fine. The Harlinden infantry can just be so brutally efficient if you don't really have anything to answer it. And I think that might be what's happened here. Muhad Beast Hunters are throwing their javelins way up into the air. They're trying to throw javelins at Linden's javelin units, which,
only half our force remains.
I mean, at this point you need to try and cut down the number of Linden infantry. There's some Serpent Guard just in the backfield over there. You can see some Serpent Guard supporting the Mumakil, dealing with the Nolder and Horse Lords, but Nolder and Horse Lords are very difficult to take down in sustained melee. I think they might be the most skillful of all the knights. They wield a two-hander in melee, they don't use a shield, and they are elves. All are pretty telltale signs. And they always seem to do really well in a melee fight as well. Serpent Guard charging into the 4 Linden Marines, who are spears. I mean, at this point you just need to stop the javelins from firing, I suppose, but your lancers might be the only way to dig yourself out of this situation. The Harad cavalry needs to steer clear of the Linden pikemen, charging into those Mithlon Marines. More ranged fire coming from the Mumakil, all of which are still alive, in all fairness. What's going on over here? The Demons of the Desert, which presumably, or hopefully, managed to use their ammunition. Ooh. More javelins being thrown. Now we can see some Demons of the Desert moving forward. They need to make full use of their payload. If they can kill those Nolder and Horse Lords here if they're able to reload quickly. 2 units of them as well. Throw! Throw! Yes, brutal. They also hit the Harlinden Guard as well. Although these Noldorin Horseswords from Engsvitz have lasted a long time and they've taken significant punishment. They're going into the Hashari Stalkers now, but they've taken some substantial losses. I think they will probably be caught up now. Harad could yet turn this around. They do have the tools to do so. But now Sin, out of left field, reveals his Wardens of Elos Tyrion, but perhaps prematurely, because those Mumakil could squash those Rangers in double quick time. Or are they running amok? It's hard to tell. No, they're not. Could Harad be turning this around? They are. They've pulled ahead by a long way. The Mumakil have inflicted some heavy damage, and the Demons of the Desert doing very well for themselves. And it could be that abandoning their hill has actually turned out to be maybe a reckless move from Lyndon. Well, here go the Mumakil. They're running amok now. And the Javelins, I don't think the Mythlon Marines have got the Throne trait, but Javelins will still bring down Mumakil, especially seeing as they've been taking damage to their hit points all this time. With the loss of that Mumakil, that's a substantial loss as well. So despite the fact that Harad are now ahead in terms of percentage, the Mumakil are worth more than their percentage lets on. And there are also routing units of Lancers all over the place. And it's worth saying as well that quite a bit of Harad's percentage is made up of basic Haradrim units, which naturally are not going to be a match for Lyndon's in melee. There are some Hashari Stalkers over here though. 2 units of these Hashari Rangers. These Mythlon Marines are, well, the Noldorin Horseswords are also getting into them. They've been sent out here relatively unsupported. And not only that, but both units of Noldorin Horseswords are coming for them, so these Hashari Stalkers could actually die here. There's no real support force coming for Harad. This part of the battlefield belongs to Lyndon. But maybe distracting the Knights at this point in time is worth it. You can see there's some Southron archers, a full unit of them, still with ammunition left. And not only that, they may only have Haradrim spearmen here on the front, but the real thing to consider here is that there are Demons of the Desert somewhere around here. And they still have ammo as well. Demons of the Desert are one of Harad's real power units. Most people will think of the Mumakil when you think of Harad, but the Demons of the Desert are potentially just as deadly with the sort of effect they can have on enemy armies. 2 units of them as well, and they still have basic skirmishes that they can utilise as well, which Lyndon's lack of armour could come back to haunt them here. The opposite is true as well with the Wardens of Elos Tyrion on hand. Lyndon could start to run out of infantry here though. Could it be that Harad's numbers will win the day? We've still got Hashari Shadows here as well, which they're the mounted variant, are they not? Yes they are, so they will have been running around all this time doing damage. I haven't noticed them yet, so they're definitely living up to their name of Shadows. The Hashari units in general are something which are risky to bring as Harad, because they can be so easily killed with well, the melee variant certainly has got no HP, and the mounted range, none of the Hashari units have got HP, get my words out. So they can very easily be focused down by enemy skirmishers, but Lyndon's skirmishers had other things on their mind. The Hashari units in general and the Demons of the Desert here are going to be the thing which need to do the damage, although those Wardens of Elos Tyrion are in the perfect position to shoot right down the line, and they've broken all of those Haradrim spearmen, and now they're presumably going to go after the Demons of the Desert, who are probably going to take cover behind the Lyndon forces actually. This is, it was a very cagey affair in terms of manoeuvring early on, but now it's turned into a battle of aggressive manoeuvring. These Wardens of Elos Tyrion, they are right in view of these Southron archers. These Noldorin Horseswords are still proving to be a real nuisance, only 3 of them remaining. The Wardens of Elos Tyrion, normally I would say that this was a mistake to just park them right in front of a full unit of archers like this, but they needed to. They needed to have some sort of effect on that Haradrim line, which they did, to be fair, but now they're going to pay the ultimate price for it. They're going to be attacked in melee by the Hashari Shadows, as well as being attacked at range by the Southrons, and there are so many Southrons that just 3 knights are not going to be able to kill them off so easily. And there are still basic units of Haradrim archers as well. There's so many Haradrim skirmishers still alive that I think this might be it for Lyndon, considering the fact that they are also going to have to go through Demons of the Desert in melee. My word. That was been a very impressive performance by Herard, I must say. I thought that the battle was getting away from them earlier on. Lyndon being the more successful in the harassment phase, as it were, but as time has gone on, everything happened very, very quickly, and Herard are capable of inflicting huge damage on enemy armies very, very quickly with their powerful units like Mumakil, Demons of the Desert, those Rangers, and they use them all to very, very good effect, especially considering their opponent. Because Lyndon in general are a faction which can deal with mounted, cavalry heavy armies very, very easily with all of their javelins. But I feel as well as though Lyndon came down off the hill and attacked, which initially went very well for them. They pushed Herard back a lot of breaking happened, but as the battlefield devolved into chaos, essentially, chaos will always, as I've said before, tend to favour the faction which is more heavily based around numbers. Evil factions tend to be that way. Orcs especially benefit from chaos, but the evil men can, and Herard certainly can count themselves among that number, especially against the elves, and the chaos certainly favoured them here. Yeah, and it's going to be the end. Those Hashari Stalkers managed to survive the attentions of the Mithlon Marines and the Knights as well. They were needed elsewhere, so they are now taking up the old hill position that the elves had, as well as the mounted Hashari. I mean, it's not entirely beyond the realms of possibility that Lyndon could still technically win this, based on the fact that a lot of Herard's units are still lower tier, and they're skirmishers at that, so despite having a lot of numbers, can Lyndon manage to fight themselves out of this hole? There's still just under 3,000 frames to go, so it's not a wash. Even these, it's at this point in the battle when these sort of very depleted unit of Rangers that still have ammunition could prove to be pretty decisive. But there's not really anything Lyndon can do about it. They don't have any of their fast-moving mounted units left, and if they go and try and chase them down, they'll just get kited. So they need to try and deal with these archers, which, to be fair, they're wavering. All of these Herard units that are left are not exactly the last word in terms of quality, nor are they the most courageous, and these Southrons are wavering. Those Hashari are really the only units of genuine quality that Herard have left. The Hashari Stalkers are coming in, presumably to try and recharge this part of the line over here. There's still this unit of 3 Noldorin Horse Lords, which, again, Herard don't really have the tools to deal with this. This was a problem in an older build of the game, where Knights could essentially run around the battlefield with impunity, and this is turning around. The balance of power shifting very, very rapidly into Lyndon's favour. And I suppose this is the price they pay for having all of these skirmishes. That, WK's army, I think, is gone. So it's just Heracles that is left. Do these Haradrim archers still have ammunition? Is there a final twist in the tale? Can Herard once again turn the battle on its head? Something still has ammo, and it's the Hashari Shadows. Depending on how much ammunition the Hashari Shadows actually have, they, well, based on the frames that are left, they're not going to try and kite the Lyndon armies to death. I'm not sure how it goes with carrying casualties over in the RP, but neither one of these two armies or factions are going to look too pretty after this. The term Pyrrhic victory never was more appropriate. And that's another rout from the Haradrim archers. So we've seen morale was really the deciding factor here. Herard's lower morale without their general, without their buffer units, which died earlier in the fight, proved to be the decisive factor. Lyndon were able to keep their nerve. Obviously the elves in general have got the highest morale of all the factions, so they held their ground even in the face of extreme pressure from the likes of Demons of the Desert. And still, all of these units continue to return, and you can see that still, you know, Lyndon have lost way more in terms of their percentages, but they're still winning because, well, there goes a general. I highly doubt that for the elves. If they were facing a faction with a similar tier of morale, that could have turned the battle once again, but they also still have that depleted units of javelins. They are shaken. Still some Wardens of Elos Tyrian in there as well, so they survived their savaging at the hands of the Southrons. Haradrim Archers, I think this is it. This is by the skin of their teeth, though. And again, that early game harassment from the chariot, the casualties that it inflicted might well have been enough, because this is not a lot of Linden units here. They've essentially just got some of their javelins left, as well as a couple of Wardens of Elos Tyrian. And that's it. And these Haradrim Archers are just going to break on contact with the Linden forces, and that's going to be what ultimately decides the battle.
Ours, but only by a sword's edge.
That was a battle that flip-flopped perhaps more than any other battle I've seen. And I can see why I was given this one. Yeah, very, very impressive. Interestingly enough, you can see that Harad both had more men deployed and both got more kills, and they still lost the fight. This is perhaps the best example of a low morale faction having that used to punish them that I've ever shown. So, very well done to Linden. It looked pretty bleak for them at a point in that fight when the Mumakil and the Demons of the Desert really did do some hefty damage to their lines. But Harad's high burst damage was ultimately not enough, and the quality of the elves shone through against the lower tier skirmishes. And again, perhaps the case could be made that Harad went a little bit too heavy on their lower tier skirmishes. Obviously, works a little bit differently in an RP. You have to plan ahead with the units that you purchase. But a unit of dismounted Serpent Guard here could have made the difference, and even a unit of basic Southron Warband, even though they're primarily an AP spear. Again, something like that, something that wasn't a low tier skirmish unit that would just get slaughtered by the elves, could have made all the difference. And this is Engsvitz's army, so we'll see what did the damage for him. Mithlon Nobles, 122 kills. Again, it was the early game harassment they did, which was a little bit more worrying for Harad, just making them hurry their plans a little bit more. And they may not have a lot of kills, but they certainly did their job. Same thing for the Noldorin Horse Lords again. They took a lot of casualties, but they still did their job very, very well. Harland and Guard getting a lot of kills, obviously, on the lightly armoured Haradrim as they moved forward. Infantry, I think Engsvitz was the one that ultimately took the brunt of a lot of the Demons of the Desert based on his starting position. As for Sin of the Dark Cloud, very similar. The Archers getting the vast majority of the kills. Everywhere else, more limited. The Noldorin Horse Lords getting over 100, as did one unit of Harland and Infantry. Wardens of Elos Tyrian doing quite well, of course, as Rangers tend to do. But other than that, nothing too special. Only 2 kills, that unit of 4 Linden Pikes. But yeah, very, very good. Very, very entertaining to watch for a 2v2. Be interesting to see if any of the other RP battles get sent my way, if they're as good as this. Very enjoyable, so congratulations to Linden. They were on the defence, so I don't think they actually gained anything for this battle, but they didn't lose a territory either, presumably. As for Harad, the process of rebuilding presumably is going to start again now. We'll see how well this goes. We'll see how the campaign develops. I'll keep a tab on it. I'm not actually in it myself, but maybe if people are really desperate, they can call upon my services. But I doubt people will want me in their faction with how out of practice I am. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next, which I haven't quite made up my mind yet. But I do have a few things on the backlog which I could use. But yeah, I hope you join me for whatever it is.